What Italian women endured during the Second World War is a story rarely told, and even more rarely understood. In the turmoil that followed Mussolini's fall, amid German occupation and successive Allied invasions, thousands of women in Italy were deliberately targeted. They were not combatants. They were civilians, trapped between collapsing governments and advancing armies, subjected to torture, executions, and public humiliation. This is not merely a narrative of war, but one of organized violence, ethnic vengeance, and the savage human cost of political breakdown. The German massacre at the Ardeatine Caves. Among the most horrifying crimes committed on Italian soil during World War II was the reprisal carried out by German occupation forces, later known as the Ardeatine Caves Massacre. Although the 335 victims were largely men, the consequences of this atrocity marked a decisive shift in Nazi terror tactics, one after which women were increasingly exposed to reprisals, torture, and psychological abuse. The massacre was ordered by SS Obersturmführer Herbert Kappler following a partisan attack on Via Rasella that killed 33 members of the Bozen Police Regiment. Adolf Hitler himself demanded retaliation at a rate of 10 Italians for every German killed. The executions were carried out in the Ardeatine Caves, Fosse Ardeatine, on the outskirts of Rome. In a single day, 335 Italian civilians, political detainees, Jews, resistance members, some only 15 years old, were marched into the caves in groups of 5 and shot in the back of the head. Afterward, the Germans used explosives to seal the cave entrances in an attempt to erase the evidence. For Italian women, the terror did not end there. Mothers, wives, daughters, and sisters were left behind, many of them dragged into a new cycle of suffering. Gestapo interrogations, abuse, arrests, and forced disappearances became common. Post-war testimonies and records from the Italian National Association of Families of the Fallen indicate that numerous women seeking information about missing relatives were detained, tortured, or deported. The Marokinate after Monte Cassino. After the Allied breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944, another grim and largely unspoken chapter of the war unfolded: the Marokinate. The term, derived from an Italian word meaning caused by Moroccans, describes a wave of mass atrocities committed primarily by colonial troops of the French Expeditionary Corps, especially Moroccan Gumiers. Italian civilians were the victims, with women in the liberated regions of Latium, Ciociaria, and parts of Campania suffering the worst. The French forces under General Alphonse Juin were instrumental in breaching the German Gustav Line. As the story goes, Juin granted his Moroccan mountain troops a 48-hour period of unrestricted movement before the advance resumed. What followed was not liberation, but a campaign of unchecked brutality. According to accounts cited by British historian Eric Morris in Circles of Hell, as many as 7,000 women, girls, and even men and boys were assaulted, often by multiple attackers, and many were killed or later died from their wounds. William Shirer references these events in the footnotes of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich as one of the most disturbing examples of the collapse of military discipline among the Western Allies, even though his primary focus remained on Nazi crimes. Victims were sometimes mutilated or deliberately infected with sexually transmitted diseases. In towns like Asperia, more than 100 women were attacked in a single night. Entire communities were left psychologically shattered. Italian parliamentarian Luigi Gasparato would later speak of these crimes during a post-war session, condemning them as a disgraceful blot on the honor of the so-called liberators. Although Italy was officially an Allied nation at the time, its civilian population, particularly its women, paid an appalling price. The Sant'Anna di Stazzema massacre. On the morning of August 12, 1944, one of the most savage acts of civilian slaughter carried out by Nazi forces on Italian soil unfolded in the quiet Tuscan village of Sant'Anna di Stazzema. The attackers were members of the 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division Reichsfuhrer SS, commanded by SS Gruppenführer Max Simon and operating under the direct authority of General Karl Wolff, Hitler's supreme SS and police leader in Italy. Alarmed by the expanding strength of Italian resistance fighters and partisan networks in the Apennines, the German High Command initiated a calculated campaign of terror aimed at severing civilian support for the resistance. That morning, roughly 300 SS troops, assisted by Italian fascist collaborators, entered Sant'Anna di Stazzema, where hundreds of displaced civilians, women, children, and the elderly among them had taken refuge. Post-war conclusions of the Italian-German Historical Commission, supported by archival material cited by historians such as Joachim Fest and Basil Liddell Hart, describe how SS units gathered the villagers, divided them by age and sex, and proceeded with systematic executions. Civilians were herded into barns, homes, and open squares, then gunned down with machine guns or executed at point-blank range. In several instances, grenades were hurled into rooms packed with people. Even pregnant women were murdered. In a single day, 560 civilians were killed, including more than 100 children and over 200 women. Survivors later told military tribunals that many women were subjected to torture before being executed. To erase evidence, homes and churches were set ablaze, leaving the village reduced to smoking ruins. Among the many SS massacres carried out in Italy, this one stood out for its scale and methodical brutality. As Winston Churchill once remarked about Nazi actions in Italy, they made a desert and called it peace. The forced labor of Italian women for the Reich. Following Italy's armistice with the Allies on September 8, 1943, the country plunged into disorder. German forces occupied northern and central Italy, transforming it into the Italian Social Republic, a puppet regime entirely subordinated to the Third Reich. From that point forward, tens of thousands of Italian civilians, especially women, were seized, deported, and compelled into forced labor to sustain Germany's failing war economy. German wartime labor records examined by historian A.J.P. Taylor, along with post-war documentation assembled by scholars such as William Shire and Joachim Fest, reveal a deliberate policy of total exploitation across occupied territories. Italy, once a partner in the Axis alliance, was now treated as conquered land. Girls and young women between 16 and 18 were especially exposed, as many men were prisoners of war or had joined partisan units. These women were transported under brutal conditions to labor camps in Austria, Bavaria, and Saxony, where they were registered as Italian workers. Their assignments ranged from munitions assembly in factories like Krupp and Siemens to agricultural labor and railway construction. The conditions were severe: 12-hour workdays, chronic hunger, and frequent disease outbreaks. Abuse by guards and supervisors was widespread, though seldom documented in official Nazi records. British historian Basil Liddell Hart observed in his post-war analyses that forced laborers were regarded as disposable tools of production, with little meaningful distinction between civilians, so-called volunteers, and those abducted outright. Later Italian government reports estimated that more than 60,000 Italian women were deported or coerced into labor between 1943 and 1945. How should history remember the women whose bodies became a battleground? Share your thoughts below. As Italian writer and partisan Curzio Malaparte wrote in La Pelle in 1949, "In war, there are no innocent victims, only silent ones.